I am Joseph Humeyer, writing fellow for the Middle East Forum. I focus on Iranian and Islamist penetration in Latin America. Venezuela is at the concern of pretty much every Latin American country and increasingly at the concern of just about every country around the world. On January 23rd, when the illegitimate presidency of Nicolás Maduro ended and the legitimate constitutional presidency, interim presidency of Juan Guaidó began, divided the world into two different camps, camps that recognized Nicolás Maduro and camps that recognized Juan Guaidó. Not to be surprised, the camps that recognize Nicolás Maduro are those that are anti-democratic, are anti-American, are anti-Israeli, and are creating destabilization all throughout the world. Within that alliance is Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, and other actors, Turkey, and other actors from the Middle East. So what this has painted is a strategic scenario in Venezuela that is a ticking time bomb. This is not going to last forever, having two presidents in one country. So eventually something's going to have to give. What can potentially happen? Well, I see several scenarios playing out, many unfortunate scenarios, but hopefully there's a scenario that's more peaceful and it creates a transition to power. One of those scenarios involves the armed forces of Venezuela. The armed forces of Venezuela, who have been co-opted and pretty much involved in organized crime within the government and within the region, has to make a decision. They have to decide whether they're going to ally with these anti-democratic forces or whether they're going to uphold their own constitution and side with the recognized president of Juan Guaidó. But however that turns out, whatever decision the armed forces make, there's still another challenge, a challenge that I believe is not being properly addressed in the international community, which is the irregular forces. Nicolás Maduro and his regime has been fortified and prepared to deal with this specific scenario because they have backing from Russian military contractors, from Cuban paramilitary elements, from Hezbollah, and from Iranian Basij and Quds force operatives that have fortified his regime. So even in the case that the military defects and goes against the Maduro regime, they would have to face up to these irregular forces, which would create a civil war scenario in Venezuela, not unlike the civil war that we've seen in Syria. And meanwhile, the number of refugees continue to outflow throughout Latin America. We're at 3.3 million refugees as we stand right now. If a civil war is to break out, that could easily double by the middle of the year. And according to some think tank projections, such as the Brookings Institute in Washington, could reach as high as 8 million by the end of 2019, which would make it the largest refugee crisis in the world, surpassing Syria from the Middle East. So why do we hear so much about Iran and Hezbollah in Venezuela? Or frankly, why do we not hear as much as we should hear about their penetration into that country, into the crisis, into what's quickly turning into a conflict? So let me share a quick anecdote to kind of show about the penetration that not just Iran has, or not just Hezbollah has, but Islamist forces for decades have in Latin America and Venezuela in particular. So there's a story in Latin America that's very famous about a lieutenant colonel that had political military ambitions to be able to take a sociocultural identity and nationalize resources to expand a revolution, first in his country and then throughout the region, accusing foreign invaders of imperialists and also trying to unify a region around this identity. This individual died after 14 years in power, but not before creating a legacy of crime and corruption and exporting his revolution region-wide. Now, I tell that story in Latin America, and everyone assumes I'm talking about Lieutenant Colonel Hugo Chavez. But in fact, that also describes Lieutenant Colonel Gamal Abdel Nasser. And one of the things that is very important to understand about the Bolivarian Revolution, which is the revolution of Venezuela, is that it was inspired by the pan-Arab nationalist movements. And when you look at the Middle East and the conflicts in the 20th century of pan-Arab nationalist movements that dominated a lot of the geopolitics in the region at the time, is the downfall of the pan-Arab nationalist movements and the rise of the Iranian Revolution in 1979. History has a form of repeating itself, and what we're seeing in Latin America today is the rise and fall of the Bolivarian Revolution and 21st century socialism and the expansion of the Iranian Revolution all throughout Latin America. It begins and ends with the combination of revolutionary frameworks, and that's where Hezbollah comes in. Hezbollah, beyond being a terrorist organization, beyond just being a transnational criminal organization, Hezbollah has also become a political element that has been able to expand its terrorist and organized crime networks using surrogate forces. Much the same way they've done in the Middle East, in Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq. They've done the same in Venezuela, in Bolivia, in Paraguay, the tri-border area. And there's plenty of groups in Latin America that aren't Islamists, and you wouldn't even think they're connected to Hezbollah, but they're working closely with them. Hezbollah has perfected the art of asymmetric war in combination with Iran, and Venezuela is now being used as a proxy conflict for these global forces.